If you are watching this, then chances are you've already heard of Mercury retrograde. Mercury is the planet of communications, aka the messenger of the gods, and up to 4 times a year, Mercury appears to go backwards from our vantage point here on Earth. It's actually an optical illusion, but it's filled with symbolism. After centuries of testing out this theory, astrologers all agree, pretty much as far as I've ever seen in 20 plus years of being an astrologer, Mercury retrograde brings confusion. It also brings second chances and times to rethink, revise, revisit, and pretty much redo anything and everything. And guess what? Mercury is retrograde right now. So I thought I would create this post to help you clarify and simplify the concept of Mercury retrograde for better understanding. So let's start with the question. What is Mercury retrograde? In simple terms, because all the planets move around the sun at different speeds, every now and then they appear to be going backwards in the sky from our vantage point here on Earth. So astronomically, what you see is the planet moving backwards through the degrees of the zodiac. If you were to look in an ephemeris, you would see that all of a sudden, instead of going up through the numbers in the zodiac, it's going backwards. Astrologically, what you get when Mercury is retrograde is extra room for misunderstandings, but also extra chances for do-overs and also for repetition. So what Mercury retrograde isn't? It is not bad luck or a time of misfortune or anything to fear. Mercury is, among other things, the planet of communications, travel, and transport, for example. So anything to do with those subjects can go haywire under this cycle. In fact, one study reported in the New York Times, you can Google it, found that more plane luggage, so luggage of plane passengers, did actually go missing during Mercury retrograde. So this cycle is likely to cause confusion and errors, but that's kind of it, more than anything like anything inherently bad. I actually co-wrote a book about this. It's called the Mercury Retrograde book. So let's unpack the astrological jargon. One thing which does trip people up about Mercury retrograde is the jargon. For example, there's the retrograde itself, but before that, we get the pre-shadow phase, and after it, we get the post-shadow phase. In a nutshell, these two expressions or phrases concern themselves with the degrees when the retrograde starts and ends, how far back Mercury retrogrades in a cycle, and at what degree of the zodiac it needs to be at for the whole cycle to be completely over. This is not really that complicated or technical once you have your head around the idea of Mercury retrograde, but it's also not something you really need to worry about when you're first starting out. Again, if you're curious, see my book, the Mercury retrograde book. So let's define a few other terms associated with Mercury retrograde. Another bit of jargon you might hear is about Mercury stationing or going direct. The first refers to when Mercury is about to go retrograde or about to end its retrograde. And the secondly is basically the opposite of Mercury retrograde, when Mercury goes direct. So the station is when it's about to go direct or about to go retrograde. Sorry, I'll say that again. Mercury retrograde confusion. The station is when it's about to either go retrograde or go direct. And Mercury direct is when the retrograde is over. All right, so there are a few of the technical terms. What about emotionally? Why do people sometimes struggle during Mercury retrograde? I think for a start, it's worth noting that some people actually flourish under this cycle. In particular, if you were born when Mercury was retrograde, chances are that this cycle suits you. For another thing though, Mercury has a bad name. Mercury retrograde, I should say, has a bad name. And sometimes Mercury retrograde being bad becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. anything bad which happens around that time, people blame on Mercury retrograde. In fact, my favorite example was once when I was talking about this and someone on a Facebook post wrote underneath it, yes, you say it's not bad luck, but actually I had a burst appendix in Mercury retrograde. I can tell you, Mercury retrograde has got nothing to do with burst appendices, if that's the plural. No disrespect to the person who sent that. I wrote a nice reply, I hope. But no, it's not like that. It's true to say there can be issues when Mercury is retrograde. There can be misunderstandings which lead to upsets, and there can be breakdowns of things associated with Mercury, like, for example, phones breaking down and cars breaking down, which can lead to frustrations. But it can also, but it's not bad luck. It's really only sort of misunderstandings, miscommunications, like I said, computers blowing up, that kind of thing. The other thing is that people don't often realize is that Mercury retrograde can be used to your advantage. Anything you want to undo is easier to backtrack on when Mercury is retrograde. I think the last thing to say is that every Mercury retrograde has a slightly different flavor and will affect you in different ways. For example, Mercury might be retrograde in your money zone, which could bring confusion regarding cash. Or it could mean that money you're owed finally turns up, for example. Or it might be in your love zone. Mercury retrograde in your love zone, your 7th house, and suddenly your ex reappears. Mercury retrograde is nothing to fear. It's something to work with and try and think as we go through Mercury retrograde, where do I need a second chance? Where do I want a do-over? Where can I do things differently now that I have this opportunity? Just finish by saying, if you love content like this and we're not already connected, please find me on Instagram, on Facebook, or sign up for my free newsletters, links in the description. I'd also love to suggest, if you're curious about Mercury retrograde, take my free Mercury retrograde quiz. Just go to my website, yasminboland.com, look under quizzes, there's a Mercury retrograde quiz, and it will give you an idea of how well or not you are likely to deal with Mercury retrograde. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.